While scanning the restaurant for the client I was supposed to meet, I spotted my ex-wife, Susan. She was seated next to a slightly overweight middle-aged man. The guy had clearly been in good shape once, but time and indulgence had taken their toll. Susan was practically glowing with satisfaction, nestled close to him. Everything about the man screamed affluence. Standing in the foyer, watching them, a flood of memories overwhelmed me. It had been 3 years since our divorce, but the emotions resurfaced as vividly as if it were yesterday. Here I was, observing from a distance, instead of sitting beside her as I once did. Her wish, it seemed, had come true. My troubles had started on a business trip to Albany. I'd planned to stay overnight to avoid a long drive back the next day. Not long into my journey, my client called to cancel. His fender had been damaged, but he was unharmed. Apologetic, he suggested rescheduling, which I was fine with. I wasn't eager for the additional 2 hours of driving anyway. I assured him I'd make the best of it and promised to be home for a romantic dinner with my beloved wife. An hour and a half later, as I approached my street, I noticed 3 unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. Susan often had her girlfriends over when I was away, so I thought little of it. I parked on the street and walked to the house, expecting everything to be as usual. The first sign something was amiss was the 4 sets of clothes strewn across the living room floor. I froze when I heard Susan's scream, a primal, uninhibited cry of pleasure I knew all too well. My heart sank as the reality hit: my wife was having sex with someone else. Hesitant but resolute, I climbed the stairs. As I reached the top, another scream erupted from Susan, a sound that made my blood run cold. I peered cautiously around the bedroom doorframe and saw 3 men, 2 strangers and Jeff Davis, her boss. They had Susan in a compromising position, one I never imagined seeing her in. Jeff, with a smug grin, praised her. "Susan, you're amazing. I love having you around. And thanks for making my clients so happy. They adore your body as much as you enjoy flaunting it." I was horrified. Jeff was exploiting Susan, pimping her out to his business contacts. The men treated her as their personal plaything, using her in ways I had never seen, even after 10 years of marriage. Her wild, uninhibited behavior was both shocking and degrading. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I quietly retreated, unnoticed. I went downstairs to my office, retrieved my digital video camera, and found an old holiday tape with some space left. I wasn't aiming to make a feature film, just to document the scene for my lawyer. Returning to the bedroom, I recorded a short segment, capturing Susan's face and the men's actions. The footage lasted only about 10 minutes, any more would have been too much to bear. While some might find this scenario arousing, it left me deeply saddened and betrayed. Seeing Susan reduced to a mere object of desire for other men was almost unbearable. I needed to calm down and think clearly. In my office, I retrieved my gun from the safe, removing the safety. I wasn't a violent person, but I felt the urge to let off some steam if things got out of hand. Next, I collected all the car keys and wallets from the men's clothing left on the floor, went outside, and deflated all their tires, including Susan's. Returning inside, a grin of satisfaction spread across my face. I was devising a plan, knowing it would work. Susan's cell phone had been on the bedside table while I recorded. I grabbed my camera, went behind the stairs, and dialed her number. It rang several times before her voicemail picked up. I started to leave a message, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction as I prepared for the next steps. Sue knew I would call around this time, so I called her back every couple of minutes until she finally answered. It sounded like she'd instructed everyone around her to be quiet, because the silence was palpable. "Hey Bobby, how's Albany?" Sue asked, breathless. I could hear muffled chuckles in the background and noticed her slightly out of breath. "Sounds like you've been running around," I said, masking my fury with a veneer of concern. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I had to rush upstairs to answer my phone," she explained hurriedly. "My client canceled the meeting, and I'll be home in just a few minutes. I was wondering if you wanted to go out to dinner." Her voice was oddly nervous. "Sure," I replied evenly, though inside I was seething with an intensity I'd never felt before. "I'll see you soon." "Great, just give me a moment to get ready." "See you soon," she said quickly, and before I could respond, she hung up. I couldn't help but laugh to myself, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Sure enough, within a minute, 4 completely naked individuals started descending my stairs. The men scrambled to get dressed at record speed, while Sue hurriedly threw on some clothes and shoes. As they all rushed out, Sue walked to the door, hoping they'd leave before she went outside. If she hadn't been so preoccupied, she might have noticed my car parked directly in front of the house. The men were shouting as they left, and Sue went out onto the porch to hear them out. At that moment, I slammed the front door and locked it behind her. Her face was the last thing I saw through the glass as she turned to plead with me, her eyes filled with desperation. The time for negotiation had passed. The men immediately returned to the porch, banging on the door, clearly looking to retrieve their wallets and keys. I called 911, reporting a break-in attempt. The dispatcher informed me that one of my neighbors had already called about the disturbance. I gave my name and address, and within 2 minutes, a police officer arrived. As the officers questioned Sue, I stepped outside to meet them. "Officers, these men raped my wife, and I want them all arrested," I said firmly. The men's reactions were immediate and chaotic. They all started shouting, insisting that it was consensual and that Sue had invited them. She wanted it. "I didn't rape anyone," they protested. Everyone, including me, turned to Sue, waiting for her to respond. With her head lowered in shame, she quietly admitted, "I invited these men into my home. I had sex with them. No one raped me. I did this willingly." The relief was palpable among the men as they realized they weren't facing rape charges. 2 additional police cars arrived at my request. The officers took down everyone's names for their report. The senior officer then addressed me, his gaze contemptuous. "If your wife invited these men and they're all over 18, there's not much we can do. You might want to consider counseling or something similar." I instructed the police to arrange a taxi for the men and made it clear that Sue would not be allowed back into the house that night. One of the men, discovering that all their tires were flat, called for a taxi. They attempted to accuse me of stealing their wallets and keys, but I told the officers I had no idea what they were talking about. I turned and returned to the porch, where Sue stood with the men, tears streaming down her face. As the taxi arrived, Sue tried to approach me, her voice trembling. "Bobby, I'm so sorry," she began. I cut her off before she could finish. "You broke my heart, and I will never forgive you. Jeff called you a whore, and I think that's appropriate. From now on, you're a whore to me, and I won't ever use your real name again. If you need to talk to me, do it through Tad." With that, I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I left her standing there, crying, and retreated to the safety of my home. When Jeff attempted to embrace Susan, she pushed him away. Strangely, this small act of resistance offered me a sliver of relief. However, that brief moment of solace quickly evaporated as I returned to our bedroom. The room was saturated with the pungent smell of sex, and it sent me into a furious spiral. I grabbed the mattress and hurled it onto the front lawn, then stormed into the garage for my toolbox. With a frenzied energy, I dismantled the bed and threw its pieces onto the lawn alongside the mattress. Returning to the bedroom, I spotted Susan's cell phone on the floor. I picked it up and rifled through her contacts and messages. My stomach churned as I discovered a collection of revolting emails, photos, and videos from men I didn't recognize, though it was clear Susan knew them well. I began searching for garbage bags, chuckling bitterly at my own determination. I used to be attentive and caring, but those days were long gone. I carried the boxes from our bedroom downstairs, sorting their contents into separate piles on the lawn. Then I tackled the guest room, where I encountered another surprise. As I moved the dresser drawers outside, the last drawer resisted. Frustrated, I yanked it forcefully, hearing the plastic crack. When the drawer finally opened, I discovered several DVDs hidden beneath. Despite one of the cases being broken, the discs themselves seemed intact. My heart sank further as I read the titles. I carried everything into the living room and began reviewing the contents. The first set of DVDs featured Susan and her best friend Sarah. What I had assumed were innocent gatherings at Sarah's house were, in fact, explicit encounters with multiple partners. The shock of seeing my wife and her friend in such compromising positions was overwhelming, and tears began to flow. But I couldn't stop there. The next two discs were even more devastating. One showed Susan with her tennis instructor, a man I had been paying for her lessons. It was clear now why she was always too exhausted on Saturday nights. The second disc revealed Susan in a compromising situation at her workplace, on a boardroom table with Jeff and his superior, Bill Evans. Bill was a prominent figure in the community, frequently featured in local events and charity functions. It was gut-wrenching to see him engage in such acts with my wife. I gathered all the incriminating evidence, Susan's cell phone, the DVDs, and the earlier video recording, into a large envelope. I planned to hand it all over to my lawyer and best friend, Ted Worth. Ted had been a steadfast ally, one of the few people I truly trusted. Nothing else mattered at that moment. As I looked at Susan's computer, I decided to search through it as well. Pressing the space bar brought the machine to life. I began copying every file, emails, photos, and videos. It took about an hour to transfer everything. Once the files were copied, I started sifting through them. The computer held more explicit videos and images, similar to what I had seen on the discs. I also discovered emails spanning the last 6 months. Susan had tried to conceal these communications under deceptive file names, but I managed to uncover them. There were numerous letters from Jeff and other men, as well as a disturbing exchange between Susan and Sarah. One email, in particular, nearly crushed me. Susan had detailed, in chilling clarity, her reasons for not leaving me and returning to single life. Sarah's questions about why Susan stayed with me, coupled with Susan's own descriptions, were gut-wrenching. I considered grabbing my gun, but then I realized it wasn't worth it. I needed to remain strong. The only thing left was to prepare for what was next. Susan's betrayal was undeniable, and now, more than ever, I needed to rely on the support of my friends and the legal path ahead. Sarah's voice was cold and dismissive as she recounted her thoughts on Bobby. "I don't want anything to do with him anymore," she said, her disdain palpable. "Bobby's as loyal as he is clueless. I'm just waiting for the day he figures out my secret life. He's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. Love may be blind, but it seems Bobby's heart is growing dimmer by the day." She continued with a hint of irritation, "His belly's expanding, and it's hard to stay attracted to him when I compare him to the men I'm involved with. And don't get me started on his facial hair. It's just gross. I used to care, but the thrill of the last few years is too intoxicating to abandon now." Sarah's tone softened as she mused about her future. "Jeff and Bill at work keep hinting at promotions and raises, but the real bonus would be a house and a car. If I play my cards right, I might even score some alimony. I'm looking forward to our party on Tuesday, assuming I'm not still limping from my tennis injury." She chuckled and mentioned Tony with a mix of amusement and admiration. "Make sure I get that video from last Thursday. It was my first time working out with so many guys. And as for my dream man? He needs to be rich, loyal, manageable, and, most importantly, a little bit dim. He should be at my beck and call, eager to please and utterly clueless about anything outside the bedroom. I've got my needs covered elsewhere. Sometimes, it feels too easy." With that, Sarah abruptly ended the conversation, saying, "Bobby's home now. I need to go. See you Tuesday. Call me." As I read her letter for what felt like the 100th time, each word cut deeper than the last. The phrases disgusting and the last few years echoed painfully in my mind. Was I really so blind that I couldn't see how she felt about me? Had she been cheating for over 2 years while I remained oblivious? Distraught, I collapsed onto the sofa, unable to shake the feeling of betrayal. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning. By morning, I was a wreck. I called in sick to work and reached out to my best friend and lawyer, Ted Worth. Mary, his secretary, answered the phone. I requested an urgent meeting and instructed Mary to tell Ted to meet me in an hour, using Tammy Brown's name to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation. Mary's voice was sympathetic as she responded, "I'll let him know. Ted's in court all day, but I'll pass on your message. He'll be waiting for you." I hung up and began getting dressed, but my cell phone rang. I checked the number, it was unfamiliar. Reluctantly, I answered, half expecting it to be Ted returning my call. "Hello, Mr. Thomas. This is Bill Evans from Susan's office. I'd like to discuss the events from last night and see how we can address them. Could we meet today?" I was skeptical of his intentions but knew he had a vested interest in resolving this mess. His company and his relationship with my wife were at stake. He didn't want the negative publicity or to lose valuable employees. "Mr. Evans, I have a crucial meeting this morning. I'll call you back before noon to arrange a time," I said, my voice steady. I could barely suppress a smirk, knowing he was in for a rude awakening. As I stepped outside, the scene at my house was surreal. Sue's clothes and a broken bed were strewn about like remnants of a bizarre yard sale. One of my elderly neighbors gave me a sympathetic wave, their expression a mix of pity and amusement. I couldn't help but think this was going to make quite the headline. In the city center, I grabbed a quick bite before heading to Ted's office. Mary greeted me with a cup of coffee, just the way I liked it, lots of cream, no sugar. "Wow, Bobby, I don't know what you've got on Ted, but when I mentioned Tammy Brown, he told me to clear his schedule for the day. If you're curious about Tammy, you'll have to ask Ted yourself. By the way, where is he?" Mary's attempt at humor barely registered as I processed the gravity of the situation. I was ready to confront Ted and get some answers that would hopefully restore some semblance of control in my life. Ted's reaction to the urgent call was swift. "I need to reschedule my meeting with the judge for today's hearing," he said, barely pausing to take a breath. As he hung up, he glanced at me. "Mary, don't connect me to anyone right now." With that, he shut the office door behind us. I took a deep sip from my coffee, letting the warmth steady me as I began recounting the events of the previous evening. I described the shocking discovery of Sue's new lifestyle and handed Ted the envelope brimming with evidence I had collected. Ted listened intently, his expression a mask of concentration. He absorbed every detail of my tale, his mind visibly racing through the implications of what I had uncovered. I also mentioned Bill Evans's request for a meeting today. "Well, Bobby," Ted began, leaning back in his chair, "first things first. I've known you a long time, and I can see how devastated you are. Is there any chance you and Sue could work things out?" I shook my head firmly. "Ted, if it were you and Katie in this situation, and you saw those videos and read those emails, you'd be out of there in a heartbeat. I want a divorce, but I also want to make sure they all pay for what they've done. I'm not going down without a fight." Ted nodded, understanding the gravity of my resolve. "All right. First, we'll sue Tony and the Ace Tennis Club. We won't touch Sarah, as she's merely a friend, but Sue's company is a different story. Second, we'll take legal action against the 2 clients who were at your house, as well as their companies. And of course, we'll go after Jeff Davis, Bill Evans, and their firm." Ted's voice grew more serious. "This could get ugly before it gets better, Bobby." "I don't care," I snapped back. "Even if I have to take it to the streets, I'm making them pay for what they've done." Ted was quiet for a moment, then said, "All right, Bobby. Tell me again what Bill Evans wanted, and we'll go from there." We discussed various strategies, but the idea of a full frontal attack on Sue's company felt most promising. The video footage of Davis, Evans, and Sue in their boardroom was a powerful asset. Ted pointed out that, as Sue's employers, Davis and Evans had considerable control over her position, which could lead to serious legal consequences. Ted suggested that once Bill Evans knew what we had on him, his attitude might shift, leading to a settlement offer. But let me be clear, Ted. If the offer is less than $2 million, it's a no-go. I want $2.5 million, I said with a hint of laughter. I've seen your legal fees before. Ted agreed, and we settled on a plan. Come over tonight at 7 p.m., I told him. Katie will cook a great dinner. You deserve a break. As I finished the call with Ted, I immediately reached out to Bill Evans to schedule an appointment for 2 a.m. Just then, Mary popped her head into the office. Ted, they're calling you on line 1. Ted's frustration was evident. Mary, I said, no calls. Sorry, Ted, Mary said, her voice tense. It's Susan. She wants to talk to you. Ted's irritation softened slightly. All right, tell her I'll be with her in a minute. As Mary walked away, I leaned closer to Ted. I bet Susan's already discovered that her cell phone, computer, and all her DVDs are missing. She's probably furious that I dumped all her stuff on the front lawn along with the bed. Ted's eyes narrowed. You've had a busy night, Bobby. Let me handle this call. As your lawyer, I need to clear a few things up with her. Just let me speak. Ted took the call, and though I couldn't hear Susan's side of the conversation, I could discern her frustration from Ted's responses. Hi Susan, this is Ted. Yes, I've already spoken to Bobby. He's a great guy and my friend. I thought you'd be the one to have his back, not stab him in the back. Ted's tone was firm. No excuses, Sue. I'm representing him. He has a strong case. You crushed a man who was always loyal to you. I doubt he cares much about your opinion right now. I watched Ted handle the call with a professional detachment, my mind racing with thoughts of the impending battle. The fight ahead was going to be fierce, but I was determined to see it through to the end. The best advice I can give you right now is to get yourself a good lawyer. You'll definitely need one. Bill Evans scheduled a meeting for 1:40 p.m., but I strongly advise against you being present. Listen to me, Sue, if you so much as show up outside the office door and try to eavesdrop through the glass, I'll tell Bobby to leave, and chaos will ensue. It's better for you to stay put and keep your emotions in check. I know Bobby put your belongings out on the lawn, but just as you could invite strangers into your bedroom, he has every right to throw your things out of the house. Frankly, I'm surprised he didn't resort to more extreme measures last night. Yes, he was with us, but only for self-defense purposes. Remember, he believed you were raped, as stated in the police report. If it were my Katie, I'd be behind bars right now. He was incredibly hot-tempered given the circumstances. As for your computer, cell phone, and other items not in the house this morning, you'll need to check with the other co-owner. It's possible Bobby left those things on the lawn along with your clothes, and someone might have taken them. I really can't say for sure. I've completed all the escrow paperwork on the house, and you both have equal rights to it. How you each choose to exercise those rights is up to you. I strongly recommend you stay away from the house and let Bobby live there until everything is sorted out. It's not safe for you to be in the same house with him right now. Even now, I'm so angry I could punch you in the face, so don't push your luck. Stay with Sarah, and I'll keep you updated. Please have your lawyer contact me when you have one. Tears won't change anything at this point. Besides being Bobby's lawyer, I'm also his friend, and your tears fall on deaf ears. I can be ruthless when necessary, and this is one of those times. I've always liked and respected you until today, and I'm sorry you'll now see a side of me that only my enemies and those who wish me ill usually see. It's not pretty. So, stay away from him, and don't leave your office for now. Goodbye. As Tad finished speaking, he glanced up at me with a somber expression. "I think you heard most of that," he said sadly. "Yeah," I replied, "I just wish I could face her again and tell her how I really feel. But I don't think I'm ready to endure the pain of seeing her right now." Tad's demeanor shifted to a more positive and optimistic tone. "Bobby, do two things for me," he said. "First, get those videos for me." He wanted the videotape from the night before, the footage of Tony at the tennis club, and the video of Sue with Mr. Davis and Mr. Evans in her office. I handed over the tapes, and Tad added, "Invite Mary to lunch with you. It'll be good to have some company." I gave him a puzzled look, and he quickly clarified. "I think it's better if I review these materials myself. I don't want to upset you further before our meeting at 1:40 p.m. Watching this stuff right now might only make things worse." I agreed with him and thanked him, letting Mary know the plan. She suggested an expensive lunch if Ted was footing the bill, which made me chuckle. We left the building, and Mary was a wonderful companion, helping me forget my troubles for a while. Upon returning to the office, I heard Tad's jubilant shout as we walked through the door. He was dancing at his desk, clearly elated. "This recording is fantastic, Bobby. I can't believe it," he exclaimed. I looked at him with a mix of amusement and sadness, and I think he finally understood why I wasn't in the mood to celebrate. "Bobby, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to take joy in this. I know Sue's actions have hurt you deeply," Tad admitted. "I was just excited about what I discovered." "Bobby, come here," Tad instructed, motioning for me to stand behind him. "I need you to see something." As I stood over his shoulder, Tad began to show me the footage from Tony's camera at the tennis club. "Did you watch the entire tape of Tony with Sue?" he asked. "No, I only managed to get through part of it last night," I confessed. "I was too sickened to finish it, and I almost lost my mind." "Well, I have a surprise for you," Tad said. "Just before Tony and Sue wrap up, they start gathering a small crowd in the men's locker room. It's not pretty," she allowed the other men watching to join in. "It's a real mess." I felt a wave of sickness and disbelief as I processed Tad's words. This was the reality of my nightmare, laid bare for me to see. After Tony finished his speech, Tad leaned in and said, "I'm not sharing this to upset you, Bobby, but to make you aware of something critical." He gestured toward the screen on his desk. On the monitor was an older man with long gray hair and a walrus-like mustache, wrapped only in a towel. Tad asked if I recognized him. As Tad hit play on the video, the towel dropped, revealing an impressively endowed man who then proceeded to engage with my wife. Within moments, she was surrounded by 5 other men, all waiting their turn. "Ted, I have no idea who this guy is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I assume you know him." Tad nodded. "Yes, Bobby. This footage is crucial for our meeting today at the tennis club. We'll be discussing this at 4 p.m. at Nassi's." Ted's excitement was palpable, and his plan was coming together nicely. I was grateful for his expertise and support. As we left his office to head downtown for our 2 p.m. meeting with Bill Evans, we carried with us a portable DVD player, printed photographs, and a few legal envelopes. Sue's office was on a lower floor, so we proceeded directly to Bill Evans's office on the top floor of her building. As we waited in the reception area, I noticed someone watching us from down the hallway. When I looked up, she quickly disappeared around the corner. I told myself not to let it bother me. Today, I had bigger concerns. We entered Bill's office, which was decorated with high-end furnishings and adorned with plaques, awards, and photographs of Bill with various prominent figures. As I took in the room, a troubling thought crossed my mind: was Sue ever in this office with Bill? I introduced Tad. "Hello, Mr. Evans. This is my friend Ted Worth. He'll be attending the meeting you scheduled today." We shook hands, and Bill's expression was guarded. "Bob, I thought this was supposed to be a private discussion between you and me," Bill said, his tone slightly accusatory. "I decided to bring Tad with me." "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say to him," I replied firmly. Bill begrudgingly accepted Tad's presence and started addressing me directly, ignoring Tad. This only made Tad smile, as he was keenly aware of the power of the evidence we held. "Bob, may I call you that?" Bill began, trying to sound friendly. "I was actually thinking it might be beneficial to have Jeff Davis join us. I don't know if it's possible, but it would apply to him too." I nodded. "If you think it's necessary, bring him in." Bill pressed the intercom. "Julie, have Jeff come to my office immediately. Tell him to drop everything and get here right away." As we waited for Jeff, Bill offered a sympathetic tone. "I'm genuinely sorry for all the trouble Jeff and Sue have caused you. I understand last night must have been awful, but if we work together, we might be able to resolve this." "What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Evans?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Bill continued, "I've always liked Sue. She was almost like a daughter to me." He was interrupted as Jeff walked in. The sight of him made it clear he wanted to bolt, but Bill ordered him to sit. Jeff complied, though his eyes avoided mine. "Bob, I just wanted to say," Bill started again. Before he could continue, Tad cut him off. "Are you implying you have an inappropriate fondness for Sue, Mr. Evans?" Tad's question took Bill by surprise. I stifled a laugh. Tad's comment was both sharp and deliberate, designed to unsettle. Bill's face contorted with confusion. "What are you talking about?" Tad calmly set the DVD player on Bill's desk. "Let me show you. A picture is worth 1,000 words." He handed out stills from the video, which Jeff's eyes widened as he took them. The photographs displayed Bill and Jeff in compromising positions with my wife. It was painfully clear who was in the images and what was happening. One photo even showed Bill's own boardroom table, where some of the acts had taken place. Bill's face drained of color as he realized the implications. "Jeff, are you going to explain this?" Tad pressed, his tone steely. The room was thick with tension as we awaited Jeff's response, knowing this confrontation was just the beginning. "You were foolish enough to record all of this on video and even distribute copies?" Bill Evans asked, almost at a loss for words. It was evident that Jeff, caught off guard, was completely tongue-tied. "Well, Mr. Evans," Tad began, his tone carrying both authority and a hint of amusement, "let me clarify how things are going to proceed. By the way, I'm Bobby's lawyer, but I'm also his friend, so you're going to hear exactly what we expect from you and how we want it handled." Tad's gaze swept over the stunned faces of Bill and Jeff, clearly relishing the discomfort he was causing. "First, Sue will keep her job, no exceptions. Bobby believes she's a valuable employee and that she gets along well with everyone here," Tad said, casting a meaningful glance at Bill. "Second, Jeff Davis is no longer welcome in this office. Sue stays, Jeff leaves, end of discussion." Bill's face grew pale as he absorbed Tad's ultimatum. "Thirdly, we expect a monetary offer that respects our intelligence. We will only consider your first offer and will give you a yes or no within 5 business days. We are prepared to go to court before the end of 2 months, or sooner if necessary." Before Bill or Jeff could respond, Tad pressed play on the DVD player and turned the screen towards them. The footage showed Jeff and Bill repeatedly engaging with my wife in their conference room. Jeff's face turned a shade of crimson as he watched, knowing full well that he was the one responsible for the recording. Bill sat with his mouth agape, clearly calculating the ramifications for his business, reputation, family, and finances. "Jeff, when these gentlemen leave today," Bill said, his voice strained, "we'll have a very serious discussion about your future employment here. I'll confer with my lawyer to see if we can come up with a settlement that'll make you somewhat satisfied. You both realize that if this situation becomes public, it could severely damage our business, right?" "Don't worry, Mr. Evans," Tad assured him. "We'll keep your secret as long as we see a serious proposal from you. However, I wouldn't be in a rush to dismiss Mr. Davis just yet. He might have a few extra copies of that videotape that could come in handy as leverage if things don't go our way. You and Mr. Davis can discuss the matter further. Oh, and by the way, you both could face prison time for engaging in sexual activities with an employee, which directly affects your job status and promotions. As Tad and I prepared to leave, he reclaimed the DVD player and the photographs we had brought. We exited the office just as Bill and Jeff were about to have their private discussion. I was about to ask Tad something, but he signaled for me to wait until we were outside. It was then that I noticed my wife lurking around the corner, trying to eavesdrop on our conversation. Tad, however, had spotted her. The last thing I heard before we left was Mr. Evans shouting into Julie's intercom, "Get Sue Thomas here immediately." A smirk crossed my face as I anticipated the unfolding drama. Bill would soon realize I had discovered his DVD in our house. Once outside, I inquired why Tad had suggested Jeff use his own videotape against Bill. "Divide and conquer," Tad replied with a knowing grin. "It's always better if they don't act as a unified front. If they start turning on each other, it will work to our advantage. Bill and Jeff have families and attend church, although you wouldn't guess it from the footage they filmed. They're not eager to jeopardize their personal lives right now." As we left the building, the thought of the place where my wife had betrayed me overshadowed the pride I once felt about her workplace. I felt a pang of sadness, but Tad's voice brought me back to the present. "All right, let's grab a beer before our next meeting at 4 p.m. at the tennis club," Tad suggested as we drove across town. "We could both use a drink right now. There's something I need to discuss with you, but I'm still figuring out how to approach it." We stopped at a cozy bar restaurant near the tennis club. Tad ordered 2 beers and began talking as we sat down. "Bobby, I suspect Bill Evans will make an offer, but it'll probably be just under $1 million. I know his legal team, they're very skilled, and the main player is a realist. I'll call him tomorrow and let him know that a lowball offer won't work for us." Tad's confident demeanor and strategic thinking were a small comfort amid the turmoil. As we chatted over our beers, I felt a sense of grim anticipation for the next steps. Ted leaned in, his voice steady and measured. "I want to be upfront about our options. We can either negotiate a settlement of around $3 million or walk away from this entire mess. If the offer isn't accepted, I'm prepared to drag Susan's name through the mud. I won't hold back, and I'll use every legal strategy available to ensure we win. This may get messy and very public. I'll make sure that every detail of Susan's infidelity, your marriage, and potentially even aspects of your private life are exposed. It won't be pleasant." I considered Ted's words, knowing he was laying it all out. "Ted, I've thought about this long and hard. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. I want to pursue the monetary offer first, but if that doesn't pan out, I'm ready for the full-blown approach." "Understood," Ted said. "We'll first see what Bill Evans has to offer. If it's unsatisfactory, I'll file all the necessary paperwork and use my connections at the local news stations to ensure the story gets out. They'd be eager for the footage, even if they have to blur some parts." I nodded, feeling a grim sense of resolve. "I appreciate everything you're doing. I just wish none of this had happened. It's a lot more painful being publicly humiliated than being a clueless husband. But I'm ready to do whatever it takes to end this." Ted assured me, "We'll handle this. Now, let's focus on the material for our next meeting. Mr. Harry Ryle, the owner of the Ace Tennis Club, is a key player in this. He's the man from the video. He'll likely claim that adults will be adults and that he can't intervene in personal affairs. But remember, Tony's popular at the club, especially with the women. Ryle might fire Tony just for show, but he'll likely rehire him to save face. Don't forget, most of the members are men, and women come along for the social aspects." We arrived at the meeting just in time. The tension was palpable as Mr. Ryle and Ted exchanged terse greetings. Ryle's irritation was evident from the start. "Okay, Worth, you called this meeting. Let's get it over with. I want this done quickly," Ryle said, his tone devoid of warmth. Ted introduced me. "Mr. Ryle, This is Bob Thomas. His wife is a member of your club. It has come to our attention that Tony Simba, your tennis instructor, has been involved in an affair with Mr. Thomas's wife. We need to know what actions you plan to take regarding this situation. Ryle's response was dismissive. What two adults do in their private time is none of my business. I'm not their babysitter. Stop wasting my time, Harry Ryle said, and then directed his ire at me. If you can't satisfy your wife, don't come crying to me when she finds someone else. There are plenty of unhappy wives at the Ace Tennis Club, some of whom return because of the personal attention my staff provides. If you catch my drift. My anger flared, but Ted quickly gripped my wrist, whispering for me to stay calm and follow his lead. Ted stepped forward, his voice controlled but firm. Harry, you seem to be operating under the assumption that this affair happened entirely outside of the club's knowledge. You'd be wrong to assume that. Ted then pulled out a portable DVD player, placing it on Ryle's desk. He pressed play, turning the screen towards Ryle. The video clearly showed Susan engaging in activities with Tony, as well as interactions with other men at the club. Ryle's face shifted from confident to uneasy as he watched the footage. Ted seized the moment. Harry, with full awareness and the complicity of your staff, you facilitated the activities of a paying member, Mrs. Susan Thomas. This isn't just about personal behavior, it implicates the club's reputation and its management. Ryle's demeanor faltered. Ted continued, Mr. Thomas is a dissatisfied client who has been wronged. You need to address this seriously, or there will be consequences. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as Ryle processed the implications of the video. It was clear that Ted's strategy was to pressure Ryle into taking responsibility and offering a satisfactory resolution, all while leaving the option open for more aggressive actions if necessary. Tad, with his characteristic blend of firmness and subtle menace, addressed the subdued Mr. Ryle. Mr. Ryle, let me explain the situation. Once this information comes to light, every dues-paying member will want to know whether their wives are being involved in activities here while they're footing the bills. We'll have to subpoena everyone who was in the locker room that day. I doubt the married members will appreciate the implications of your little scandal. Tad's tone took on a storytelling quality, as if narrating a dark fable. And let's not forget about the reasonable expectation of privacy, even when you were recording in the locker room. When I'm done with you, your club won't be the community beacon it once was, and your bank account will look a lot lighter. He leaned in closer, adding, so what we need from you is a serious offer, and we expect you to call me back promptly. If you handle this swiftly, it will save you a lot of inconvenience and financial loss. Ted's words hung in the air as he finished his demand. We watched Harry Ryle weigh his options. After a tense pause, Ryle finally spoke. Ted, you're a real piece of work, but your logic is hard to dispute. I'll call you tomorrow with my offer. If I meet your terms, all the tapes will be returned and remain unseen. I'll also fire Tony voluntarily. If that's all you legal blackmailers came for, then get out. Ted flashed a triumphant smile as he collected the DVD player and turned it off. Oh, by the way, he said, as we headed for the door, say hi to Tito Martinez for me. Harry's only response was a resentful go to hell, Worth, before we left. Ted laughed all the way to the parking lot, clearly enjoying the encounter. That was fun. Now we wait for their offers, he said as we headed to his house for a home-cooked meal. By the end of the week, Bill Evans had offered just under $2.7 million to keep Sue as his employee. Jeff Davis, having foolishly surrendered all his tapes, was fired and left with nothing else to offer. Bill Evans' quick decision meant Jeff had little recourse. I then turned my attention to the two clients who had been involved with my wife that night. Both were significant clients of Jeff's company. They were eager to avoid any negative publicity, both personal and professional, so each offered me $1 million to keep their names out of the spotlight. As for Harry Ryle, he refused to make an offer and instead told us to sue him. We did, and the result was a $3 million loss for him. The scandal decimated his club membership and forced him to relinquish control. The judge was particularly displeased with the footage of the private locker rooms and the nature of the affairs involved. I gave Sue a house and a car, exactly as she had wanted. However, I didn't have to pay any child support. We only met twice in court, where I greeted her with the word bitch each time, reducing her to tears both occasions. I often wondered why she cried then but not before she had wreaked havoc in my life. Despite the pain, I had managed to come out of the situation with more money than I'd ever had. I took Ted's advice to heart, but the emotional scars remained. The events of that tumultuous year replayed in my mind in a flash. I didn't notice anyone talking to me until the restaurant manager's voice pulled me back from my memories. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. I shook my head, trying to dispel the troubling thoughts. "Sorry, I was just lost in thought. I came here to see a party, so thanks for your help," I said, though the manager's skeptical look suggested he thought I was an elderly person who had seen better days. I walked over to my ex-wife's table, her surprise evident as she took in my transformed appearance. When we were married, I had been overweight, with long hair and a beard, a remnant of an old baseball injury that kept me from being active. I had allowed myself to fall into a rut, but now, I had reinvented myself. My hair was short, my physique toned from regular workouts, and my knee was repaired thanks to the financial settlement from Jeff and Bill's company. My suits were now high-end, and I always made an effort to look good in public. I decided to break the ice. "You look great today, Sue. I almost forgot how stunning you could be," I said, trying to mask the bitterness in my voice. I knew exactly how to push Susan's buttons, and I did it intentionally. As she sat there, her face wet with tears, I used her name with a biting edge. "Susan," I said sharply. "Why don't you use my name too? You know, the one you've ignored for the past 3 years." Susan's eyes flashed with anger, but she tried to control herself. "I'm telling you, Bobby, don't call me that. It just feels wrong." "I think it's fitting," I retorted. 3 years ago, you shattered my heart, and I'm going to remind you of it every chance I get." As the man beside her started to get up in protest, Susan quickly pushed him back into his seat. "Stay put," she snapped. "Don't make a scene." Her mascara was running down her cheeks, and she looked at me with a mix of anger and what seemed to be remorse, or maybe guilt. Her boyfriend, clearly annoyed by the disruption, told her to go fix your makeup and get yourself sorted out. "I'll handle this." Susan, her face stained with tears, stood up and looked into my eyes. I must have revealed every ounce of pain I'd been holding onto for the past 3 years because her expression softened, and she cried even harder. For a moment, I was taken aback. Was there still a shred of affection left, or was it merely guilt? I couldn't be sure, but it seemed like a bit of both. "I expect you to be gone when I get back," she said, her voice cracking. As she walked into the ladies' room, I noticed a large engagement ring sparkling on her finger. The man beside me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, addressed me with a sneer. "So you're Bob Thomas, Susan's ex. And you must be the new man in her life," he said disdainfully. "Seems like it," I replied, matching his tone. "And you must be the guy she's chosen to replace me." The man's expression darkened. "I'm Susan's CFO. If I were you, I'd stop calling her that. It's not going to end well for you." I could see that he was trying to maintain his composure but didn't want to escalate things. "I just need to ask you 3 questions, and then I'll disappear from your life forever," I said firmly. His curiosity was piqued. "Why should I answer your questions?" "Because," I said, "I was once in your position, and I don't want anyone else to suffer as I did. I'm not here to defend my reputation, but I want to clear a few things up." The CFO, clearly annoyed, crossed his arms. "What's the point? I'm not here to play games." "First," I began, "does Sarah still host her Avon parties on Tuesdays and Thursdays?" The CFO looked puzzled. "Sue helps Sarah with decorations on Mondays and Wednesdays." You should remember that. All right, I said, does Sue still take tennis lessons on Saturdays? No, he retorted. Sue plays tennis on Sundays. Clearly, you don't remember much. I pressed on. Last question, have you ever checked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in your living room? His confusion was evident. Why would I do that? The three questions I've asked you are why Susan and I are no longer together. I still have all the evidence from our divorce, legal documents, emails from Sarah, hours of videotapes. I've carried this with me for the past 3 years. I pulled out a worn piece of paper from my wallet and handed it to him. This is a letter Susan wrote to Sarah, detailing how she planned to get rid of me before I discovered her infidelity. The CFO hesitated but eventually took the letter. He read it slowly, his face growing pale. This letter is about you, I said. Susan was always a creature of habit, doing things the same way every time. Even now, with a new man, she's still the same. The CFO's curiosity got the better of him as he examined the letter. I could see the impact it was having on him. After reading the letter, he pulled out a pen, scribbled a quick note, and, without a word, left the restaurant. His face was a mask of stone, showing no emotion. I watched him leave, feeling a mix of satisfaction and unresolved anger. The confrontation had been intense, but the real battle was just beginning. As I skimmed through the email Sue had left open, a sense of urgency washed over me. I needed to get back to the house quickly. Stay here, Peter, I said, my voice carrying an edge of finality. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. There's something I need to check, something under the bottom drawer of my living room dresser. I'll be right back. Peter seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation, though his face betrayed his reluctance. I sensed that the weight of the discoveries had begun to sink in for him. The email was clearly a tipping point, and I could tell he needed to verify the reality for himself. Without another word, I left a note on Sue's table, letting her know I was stepping out. I had no intention of sitting in the restaurant with anyone tonight. I headed back to the foyer, where I called my client. I explained that I would be late and asked if we could reschedule the meeting. They were understanding and agreed to a new time. Before leaving, I cast one final glance at Sue's table. She returned shortly after, searching for Peter. When she settled into her seat and looked at her old email and the note Peter had left, her expression turned ashen. The realization of what was unfolding before her was evident in her ghostly pallor. Watching from a distance, I saw the moment her world seemed to crumble. The tears streaming down her face attracted the attention of everyone in the restaurant. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by my indifference. That was the last time I would see her. I couldn't shake the curiosity about whether Peter had indeed found something hidden under the dresser drawer. As Sue's sobs filled the restaurant, I could almost hear her anguish echoing in my mind. Subscribe to our channel, I wanted to say, to make sure your second chance at life doesn't end up in deceit. Stay tuned for the next story, trust me, it's even more gripping. And if you're under 18, don't even think about listening to it. As I walked away, the finality of the situation began to settle in. I knew that the story was far from over, and the next chapter would be just as compelling.